Sci-Fi alien women's story. Simple English entered his room like a scene from a dream. He never wanted to end, but this was not his story. It was her story, and the story of Earth. It began in a quiet city by the sea, where the wind smelled of salt and rust. An old Lena lived there in a small apartment. Above her repair shops, fixed radios for cargo boats, and tinkered with broken dronish, liked the soft click of circuits, and the glow of tiny lights kept a plant on. The window and a stack of old books near her bed did not speak much like Talista known. Night. The sky flickered. At first it looked like a storm that had lost its Wathan. The clouds opened. Like a slow Dora, silver shape slid out and hovered. Over the harbor no sound came from Ether, turned cool and tasted. It's like mint people gathered on the pier and pointed their phones and whispered words that had no weight. Lena watched from her window with a calm face and a fast heart, saw hatches unfold on the ship, and soft light spill down like rain figures, stepped through the light. Went, drifted toward the pier. They were tall and bright, and the air bent around them like water around stone. They were women, and their eyes held a still ocean thine. Cords like vines hung from their wrists and curled in the wind. Their hair moved with a slow tedeno. One ran a one screameth. Women did not speak. They looked at the people one by one, as if learning the shape of each. Lena put on her jacket and went down the stairs and walked to the pier through the narrow street. She kept her hands open at her sides. When she reached the crowd, a woman from the ship turned her head. Her gaze slid over faces and found Lena, as if Lena had been a light and fogged. Woman held up her palment. It lay a small disk that looked like a drop of moonlight. Lona tooketh. Disk warmed. A voice formed in her mind like a replu. Ask for a room to speak now. One else reacted. Lena understood that the voice had spoken only to. Hirsch nodded fullo. We walked behind. Lena turned and walked back to the city. The alien women moved with her without a sound. Crowd parted and watched with wide eyes and hushed breath. Lena led them to the repair shop and up the stairs to her apartment. Opened the door and stepped aside. Thee entered like light sliding over glass, and of them paused at the plant on the window and touched a leaf with carrion either. Looked at the stack of books and the soft blanket on the bed they sat on the floor with. Their legs folded like calm river. Lena sat across from themth disk. Gloud of voice grew clearer. Come for a debt written. Before your oceans cooled. Lena breathed in and out and listened. The voice said the name of a star that had no map on Earth, and told a story of flight and loss. Thee were called the Orcs. Traveled not with engines but with woven fields that pulled space like silk. Thee fought a long war with a hungry thing that ate light and left cold in. That wore a young Orci. Scientist named Ciro had built a net of gravity and starlight. Net saved 1,000 worlds and broke her ship and cast her into night Earth. Had pulled her in with blind luggage, fell into the sea in the age of iron and sail in a fishing boat. Found her and brought her to shore. Here she lay in a room that smelled of salt and wood and oil. Woke to human faces and saw kindness and fear. Spoke a few words in broken sound, and she pointed at the stars and drew lines in the air with shaking hands. A woman named Grace and a girl named May stayed by her side for 3 nights. He gave her water and warmth and the story of their small town. And the 4th night Cira stood and walked to the window and placed a thin stone on the sill. Said a promise in her own tongue, and the stone pole said, if our daughters find this world when we are weak, they will ask the house of Grace and May to speak for your kindred's voice. Pause. Are there daughters and we seek? The house of Grace and Maylena felt the floor under her and the soft hum of streetlights outside. Shid said her name in a steady voice. Alaneth Disk warmed. Woe knows the old lines on the shore, who keeps the stories of small places. Lena thought of a woman who ran the Maritime Museum near the pier. Her name was Nora, and she loved old maps and ship bells and faded logbooks. Would know Lena stood, and the Orci stood with her. He left the apartment and walked through the sleeping city. Cats watched from fire. Scapessa Gull called from a rooftop, and then fell quiet. Museum was dark, but Lena knew the back door, and the gentle knock that awoke Nora without fear. Nora opened her window a little and looked out with careful Iceland, spoke in a soft voice. Went, need to see the old. A room where the fishermen kept their things. Snara stared at the visitors and felt something cross the air like the hush. Before Snosh let them in, walked past glass cases and old flags and a model of the harbor in the back room. Nora turned on. A lamp with a shade of yellow-clothed light fell on shelves of boxes and jars of sea glass and a wooden. Cheselina looked at the sill of a small window that faced the water on. It lay a thin stone that no one had moved in. Many years Snora, said people, called it the Star Pebble, and left it as a good luck thing for Stormson. Orce woman stepped forward. Her eyes gleamed like deep water in moonlight. She touched the stone and hummed a note so low the lamp shook. The stone answered with a soft glow. Like a heartbeat, woman closed her eyes and spoke with the voice that lived in the distance as the mark of Saranara. Took a breath and steadied. Her hands Lena felt the room shift as if the walls leaned in to listen, or Sci-Fi said their enemy had returned from the dark between filaments of space, had eaten 3 outpost suns, and now moved toward a gate that hung behind. Saturn, like a silver ring in Shadowth Gate, had slept for ages and woke when human probes sent whispers over its enemy. Had tasted those whispers and followed them, could not close the gate from our side while it sleeps. Need a voice from Earth to wake it. So we may lock it with our net. We need a house we can trust. Nora looked at Lena and saw in her the calm of deep water. She nodded and said they would help. Orsai asked for a small room to build a bridge. Nora offered the old lighthouse on the point. They walked there before dawn, while the sea breathed and a thin cold stretched over the sand. Lighthouse had a spiral stair and windows like watchful iced, or sea unpacked long ribbons of metal and crystal from cases that seemed too small to hold them. They wove the ribbons through the stairwell and across the lantern room, and the air began to sing. Lena watched their hands move with a dance that was also mashed, learned the pattern by seeing it and by feeling the pull in her bones. Orsai named Kale smiled at her without showing teeth, and guided her palms to a coil. Hold this line steady. While we Tunalina held it and felt the coil thirst for harmon. If sunrise turned the room gold. Song grew, clear. A halo opened in the air and showed a dark ring edged with frost beyond. It churned a gray that looked dry and hungry. Nora crossed herself out of old habit, then stopped and stood straight. This will pass, she said, in a quiet voice that had no tremble. Orsai sang to the gate, and it shook off sleep like Dooth Gray on the other side, shuddered and pushed inward like a slow fist sharp. Shapes moved within it like bones in a cloud. Kale touched the disc, and the voice spoke again. But now it was not only in Lena, it was in the lighthouse walls and in the waves and in the stones. Beneath the point, need a human link to anchor the lock. A heart that has stood against fear and did not break. Nara shook her head and stepped forward, but the voice said, "No, your place is to keep the story if we fall." Voice turned to Lena. You bend without breaking. You listen before you speak. You are the house we choose. Alina felt heat in her chest like a small sunge, looked at Kale and at the others who were calm and bright and full of long. Yersh nodded. One scale placed the moonlight disc on Lena palm, and it sank into her skin without. Painch felt lines stretch from her out into the singing machine, into the gate, and beyond saw the net of starlight like thin rivers that tied worlds. Together saw the enemy as a hunger that had forgotten how to stop, spoke into the net. With a voice that was still her own wake, and closet gate flareth. Gray pushed harder, and shapes reached through the halo-like claws of ash. Lighthouse groaned. Stair twisted. Nora fell to one knee, and then rose with stubborn. Urselina held the linacle, and the others wove faster, and the song climbed like a wind over a mountain. He felt fear like ice in her spine, and then she felt a memory of warm bread and small kindness, and the steady work of fixing broken things. She poured those into the Nehumans. Do small brave things. She'll sadway plant gardens and cracks it, keep each other warm. When power fails, make small lights and share them. We'll hold this door with you, and then we will close it and let the sea grow quiet again. Net brighteneth. Enemy paused as if confused by a taste it had not known. Kale leaned close and pressed her forehead to Lanier. Heart sings in a human key that fits the lock noth. Kah. Orsai pulled the ribbons. Tithe halo narroweth. Gray screamed without sound and tried to widen the ring. Lena felt the pull try to take her breath, and her Naminora began to read from an old logbook in a firm. Voiced read notes from a storm a century past and the names of sailors who came home after long. Weathers read the words of grace and May found in the margins about tea and laughter and mended. Etzlina took those names and those soft lines and fed them into the locked gate, shivered, and began to salone of the enemy. Shapes slammed into the narrowing halo and broke like dry foam. Another reached for the ribbons, and Bernard Kale sang higher, and the others joined, and the lighthouse floor hummed.